Hello, and you're very welcome to the Irish Photography Podcast. My name is Darren, I'm your host, and your ears are not deceiving you. Yes, there is a new episode, but it's not a normal episode. It's kind of a Irish Photography Podcast, unscripted, bare, laid raw. So I wanted to give an update on the silence on the podcast for the last number of months. Now, there's been a lot that's happened this year, and this is, like I said, is a raw episode, so I'm not going to kind of give it a title or anything like that, but I want to fill you in on a couple of status progress. I want to fill you in on a couple of statuses, I suppose, and thoughts on the podcast to date and for the future. So, from my point of view, those of you that know me quite well will know anyway that I decided earlier this year to kind of go full time in photography, and it's something I've always wanted to do. I've loved photography and I've got a passion for photography for over a decade, and I said, okay, it'll be great now for me to be able to turn that passion into something that I can give back. And that's what I did back in January. And I love the fun of the community, and I also love in relation to teaching people and showing people how they can get the most out of photography. But when I do the podcast, of course, there's a lot of time that goes into that. And when I had to make that decision that I wanted to do that, then I have to start prioritizing things because, let's face it, as much as a passion this is for me, there's a cost involved. So I need to make sure that I'm doing things that are going to potentially generate revenue. I mean, if at the beginning of the year, I sat down and said, okay, what am I going to do for this year? I had a list, and I wrote out a list of nearly 200 people that I wanted to have as a guest on the podcast. And as much as I really, really love having people on the podcast and talking to them, I find it fascinating to hear their stories. I kind of started thinking and saying, okay, things kind of need to evolve. And when I look back in the podcast, myself, John, and Diarmuid, we started it back in 2018. And that format I really, really loved because every single week, each of us would take the hot seat. We didn't know what we were going to be getting. And it was as much fun for us as it was for you guys, the listeners. Then it was myself and Diarmuid, and that format was for around 2 years. And again, I really enjoyed that because it was good to have, a regular person to bounce off, and we had some great cracks. We're still great friends as well to this date in relation to that. Then I took the format on my own. And, I think I've said this before, I don't really like the whole idea of me giving a monologue for an hour on a podcast. It's great for me to get somebody else onto the podcast and to talk to them and share their life journey in regards to photography, and hopefully it can inspire you and it can inspire me as well. I mean, I loved, like I said, having everybody on. I love doing the interviews. I love writing the questions, and I think I kind of got good at writing the questions and such like that. But I was always looking for something of more stability, and I loved the idea of, when Diarmuid said to me back in February, okay, he's going to come back, I was excited again about the podcast. But just like for me and like for Diarmuid, there's prioritization needs to happen. And as you know, Diarmuid didn't come back from February, and I don't think Diarmuid is going to get the opportunity to come back because he, like me, has to make sure that he is utilizing the one priority or the one commodity that we all share, which is time. So I was thinking during the year, okay, I can have all these people, I can have all these guests, but for you guys and the listeners, and that's why I do the podcast. I don't do the podcast just for me. I do it for you guys and the community that we've created, an excellent community that we've created, not only in Ireland but worldwide. But I was thinking, okay, it needs to evolve because for me, potentially it was going a bit stale. Now, again, the strange thing for me was that maybe it wasn't going stale. It was going stale for me to do it, but for you, the audience, the listeners who loved it, because despite me having that thought process, I still would get regular number ones as well on the Irish podcast chart, which still blows my mind, and it's amazing that that still kind of happens. But like I say, I wanted to think, and what can we do to evolve the podcast. There's a cost not only in time but also in the hosting. So I'm saying, okay, what am I going to do now? I'm coming towards the end of the year. I've got a number of things that are building up from my own personal point of view. And am I now going to invest the money into hosting for next year? I mean, I've never made any money from the podcast. I never wanted to make any money from the podcast, but it is something that I have to consider. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And where does it go next as such. So additionally to all of that, like I said, for me going full time, I've done quite a lot. I have a lot of achievements that I'm really, really proud of, and I have a lot of things now as well that are going to take up a lot more of my time going into 2024. And on top of that, I've had, personal challenges. And right now, that might sound different. I'm not at my usual position when I'm recording this podcast. In fact, I'm actually lying up in bed. I'm using the DJI mic actually, so tell me, how does it sound? But yeah, I've had an ongoing issue with my back, and it came to a fray there towards the end of the summer where I couldn't barely even move. So I've had to go and get some surgery on my back, and now I'm in strict bed rest for the next 2 weeks. And that has got me thinking even further as well on, all the things that I do need to get done. And when I'm able to get back up on my feet again, where am I going to put my time and what am I going to put my priorities into? So what's next, I suppose? And, is this either the end of the podcast, or is it the next evolution of the podcast? That's where you come in. So I need your feedback on this one. And if you're listening on your phone, on iTunes, or on Podbeam, or if you're on Android, please let me know what I should do next. What you like about the podcast, or even what you don't like about the podcast. I'm all ears, and I want to hear your thoughts. Now, if you're listening on YouTube, shout out actually to Julian Baird, who always gives me a comment on the YouTube channel. Well done, Julian. If you're listening on YouTube, let me a comment on that. And if you're listening on your phone, go into the Instagram, let me a comment underneath the post that I put up for this podcast, or even on the Facebook group as well. Put a comment underneath there too. And actually, what I'm thinking about that, the time that I would have put in as well in the past, I loved doing the Friday features on Instagram, but it takes a hell of a lot of time, and I just didn't have that time. And even on the Facebook group, I still do the Sunday or the Shunday showcase, and I love seeing everybody's images there. And I think it's something that's still great that people chose and still choose to share their images on that as well. But apologies, I haven't had much time to be able to dedicate in regards to it. So again, let me know on the Facebook group, or let me know in a comment on Instagram, or let me know on YouTube. What I want to know, anything at all really. Should I change the format? Or is there anyone that wants to come on and get a particular topic off their chest? So for example, why is camera gear so damn expensive? Or how about photo competitions? What you like about them or dislike about them? The canvas is blank, really. So I'm really looking forward to reading your comments, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. But please do send me a comment, even if you have to use a carrier pigeon. I want to get feedback. The future of this podcast now is really in your hands, the listeners, and it's you who I make this for after all. So thank you very much for listening to my monologue. That's it for now. Hopefully I'll have another podcast out soon. Slán go fóill.